Hi there, thank you so much for joining me today. This video is going to be an eyeshadow palette tag. It's round 2 of an eyeshadow palette tag that Samantha March and Allie Glines created last summer. I wasn't actively making videos at that time, so I didn't make a video for that tag last year, so when I saw round 2 come out, I knew I had to jump on it. I have Samantha's channel, Allie's channel, the original playlist, the new playlist. I'll have everything that you would need in the description box, as well as the 11 questions. Before I start answering the questions, I want you to keep in mind that I have 20 eyeshadow palettes. I like watching these types of videos because you're looking at it from different perspectives of people who have hundreds of palettes, people who have 3 palettes. It's really cool to see how your answers might be different depending on not only how many eyeshadow palettes you have, but also what your makeup routine and your preferences are with colors and formulas. The very first question is your all-time favorite, and when I was trying to figure out what I would answer, I was stuck between 2 main palettes, and that was the ABH Sultry and the Too Faced Natural Nudes. These palettes are so beat up. They are staples in my makeup routine. When I was trying to figure out which one would beat out the other one as my all-time favorite, I was thinking about the fact that I love the mattes from this palette, and I like the mattes from this palette too, but I like the shimmers in this palette more than the ones from the Natural Nudes palette. And so I was thinking if I could figure out a way to have the mattes from this and the shimmers from this in one palette on its own, that palette would be like unbeatable. And these are my 2 most used palettes, but I've used the ABH one more, and I think the main reason for that is because I've owned it for longer. In the end, Sultry beat out Natural Nudes by just a little bit, only because when I thought about what I wore on my wedding day, I wore Sultry. This is the palette I went to for my wedding day. I think that speaks volumes. And in the end, I do like the shade options. I think this is just slightly more versatile than the Natural Nudes. And even though I do love the mattes, I love both the mattes and the shimmer formula in this palette, and I just reach for it a lot more. In general, I'm just a big fan of the ABH formula. So this one I would definitely say is my all-time favorite. I wish it wasn't a limited edition palette. I don't understand why ABH hasn't made this permanent. The next question is my new favorite. I didn't even have to think about this. It is 100% the Rose Quartz palette from Huda Beauty. I just finished filming the 3rd look for my 3 looks 1 palette video. That's what I'm wearing on my eyes today. I believe that video should already be out. Everything about this palette is just amazing. I love the packaging. I love the color story. I find myself constantly wanting to dip into this palette even when I'm actively trying to focus on other palettes in my collection. So yeah, this one won by a landslide. There was no question. This is my new favorite. And the next question is Keep for the Memories. This one took a little bit more time to think about because I don't want to say I'm not a sentimental person, but I don't keep things just for their sentimental value. I only keep makeup that I can see myself actively using. I know some people will have like a memory box or something where they'll keep products that have memories associated with them, but they're not things that they use anymore, and they'll keep them like as a little keepsake. I don't do that with any of my makeup. I have a much more utilitarian approach when it comes to keeping things in my collection. So I just tried to think of what palette evokes the best memories for me, and that is going to be the Limoncello palette from ColourPop. And I want to point out it's not necessarily because of memories I have from using this palette. It's more so what the palette reminds me of and what it represents. I've mentioned it before, but my family's Italian. My mom is from Sicily, and this color story of the lemons and the bright colors and the kind of like ceramic tile decoration, this reminds me of how our house was decorated growing up. All my life, up until very recently, my parents did some changes with their house and they went with a little bit more neutral, but all my life our house has always been incredibly colorful, especially the kitchen. The walls were yellow, the curtains were orange, all the decorations and plates were ceramic from Italy, and there was lots of lemons. We have a tablecloth covered in lemons. We have lots of lemon things in that kitchen. Even the shade names, everything about this palette just reminds me not only of like my family's heritage and, you know, the house that I grew up in, but also the names of the shades. At the end of 2019, I went to Italy with my then boyfriend and my parents, and we went and I introduced my boyfriend to all of my family that lives in Italy currently, and he proposed to me in Capri, which is the shade name of this green color right here. I have been lucky enough to get to travel to Italy a few times in my life, and being able to introduce him to such a big part of my life that he maybe didn't know that much about, and all the memories we made while we were there. And it really is 100% the packaging and how this was set up. It's not so much the shades inside, even though the colors in here are beautiful and there are some really stunning shades that I love using. If all of these shades had been in a different palette that didn't have all of this beautiful packaging, I probably wouldn't have purchased it. So it's not so much I keep it for the memories because of memories I have from using this palette. It's more so what this packaging reminds me of. And I'm not just keeping it for that. It is a palette I enjoy using. The next question is an underrated palette, and even though I do have an answer, I want to mention that I'm probably not the best person to determine what is considered underrated. Even though I do watch makeup videos a lot, I'm not really following people who have enormous collections or who are always following the latest trends and the latest releases. I follow a lot of people who do like project panning and mindful consumerism and stuff like that. I watch a lot of smaller channels of people with smaller collections. So I don't know if I'm the right person to know like what's exactly on trend or what everyone's talking about or what no one's talking about. So just keep that in mind. But a palette that I do think is pretty underrated is this one from Geology Cosmetics. It's the Pilbara palette, and this is an Australian makeup brand. I don't know if I've talked about this palette too much on my channel. I do know a couple people that I follow on YouTube who have this palette and have said great things about it. I do follow Geology Cosmetics on Instagram and on Facebook, so I see content about this palette pretty often, but I don't hear everybody talking about it all the time. And also, even though these shades are very gorgeous and I love olives and I love pairing olives with oranges and reds, and this shade right here, Starry Sky, it's like a green glittery shimmer shade. I love wearing this. I always love how my makeup looks when I wear that shade in particular. Even though I do love the palette, it's also kind of underrated to me. It's one of my underutilized palettes in my collection. I don't reach for it enough. So not only do I think it's underrated in the makeup community as a whole, I think it's also underrated in my collection as well. This next question makes me a little bit sad, and that's not a favorite but can't get rid of. And my answer would be the Colored Rain Queen of Hearts palette. This was one of my focus palettes in January for my palette rotation project pan, and I did reach for this quite a few times, and I kind of loved it again. I realized why it was such a favorite for so long, and I do have a 5 looks 1 palette video featuring this palette. I go through each shade individually, I do swatches, etc. And I sung that palette's praises at the time. In 2017, I didn't buy any makeup for the entire year, and I remember mentioning in videos that this palette was one that was really, really tempting my no buy, also because I think this was limited edition at the time. I went back and I watched that 5 looks 1 palette video again to try to remember what I loved so much about this palette, and everything I said still holds true, but a lot of things have changed. That video was from several years ago, multiple years ago. Not only has the market and the landscape changed, where there are so many new formulas and brands and color stories and options out there that this now has to compete with out of all the other palettes in my collection, but also my personal preferences have changed. I'm not wearing purples and oranges as much as I used to, but I still have a connection with this palette. I still enjoy it, and I don't feel ready to declutter it yet. And so even though it's not a favorite anymore, I can't get rid of it because it used to be an absolute favorite. The next question is your favorite collab, and I only own one collaboration palette, and that's the It's Freakin' Bats palette from Shroud Cosmetics and Beauty Bean. Logistics and shipping issues aside, I do think that this was a fantastic collaboration. The packaging, the shade names, the color story, Everything about this palette is not only very on brand for the company that created the palette, but also for the creator that they chose to collaborate with. Incredibly well done. This might not be like an everyday color story for me personally, but I did do a 3 looks 1 palette video with this palette and I loved it. It is something that I really enjoy using, and I think this collaboration was so well done if we don't look at the issues that came with the shipping times and everything. The next question is a 2021 favorite, and I want to give a little bit of background before I give my answer, and that is in 2021 I wasn't making as many videos as I normally do. Towards the summer, like in May, I broke my laptop, so I wasn't able to edit videos, and then I kind of took my time buying another laptop to replace it, and at the same time a bunch of really big life events happened, all really good things, but I was just so busy that I didn't have time to plan videos or film them or edit them or publish them. So I kind of took a break for like 6 or 7 months. And during that time, I wasn't participating in the Pan Those Eyeshadows project. I wasn't trying to come up with new ideas for looks or testing palettes for tutorials or for videos. And on top of that, I was so busy, I had so many things going on that not only did I just not have the mental capacity to create interesting, unique looks with different color stories and color pairings and stuff, I also just didn't have the time to do that in the first place. My favorite part of the makeup routine is my base. I love putting everything together to create like a really nice base, and so when I don't have time in the morning to do a full face, the first step that I skip is eyeshadow. And then whenever I was doing an eyeshadow look, I was going for something really simple and easy that I could pair with any lip color that I wanted to wear that day, and just things that were like really easy to throw together, 1 or 2 shades, super simple. And the 2 palettes that I used to create the majority of my looks during that time that I wasn't filming was the Charlotte Tilbury Luxury Palette in the shade Pillow Talk and the Soft Glam Mini 2. There was a several month period where the only eyeshadows I was reaching for were from these 2 palettes. And I just really loved how easy and simple it was. There's not a ton of shades to choose from, so I didn't have to really think about choosing different colors. I could kind of just grab for 1 or 2 from each palette and create a look. And if I just wanted something soft and pretty, I could just grab for any of these softer shades from the Pillow Talk quad and then put that topper shade all over to add a little sparkle. And so I would consider these 2 my favorites from 2021, not only because they were definitely my most used, but they also just gave me exactly what I wanted every time I wore them. And I relied on these 2 palettes. They were definitely my favorites for 2021, even though when I think of the grand scheme of things, I don't think that these are my absolute favorites out of all of the eyeshadows that I own. The next question is a palette you didn't expect to love. And when it comes to how I purchase makeup, I only purchase eyeshadow palettes that I expect I will love. It's not very common for me to buy palettes that I don't think I'm gonna like with the hopes that I'll be pleasantly surprised, which is not how I do things. I don't buy things purely just for the sake of reviewing them. And I also don't accept a lot of PR or receive a lot of PR, so it's not like I'm getting a lot of palettes that I'm not actively buying myself. However, I did end up receiving an eyeshadow palette in a mystery box, and when I first looked at it, I wasn't very impressed. I think the color story just seemed a little bit boring to me, but after using it for a while, I ended up really loving it. So we're gonna go back to the quad from Charlotte Tilbury, the Pillow Talk Luxury Palette. I received this at first. I think you could see my reaction in that mystery box unboxing video. I was just like, okay, I hear really great things about this. People love this palette, but I don't really see what the big deal is. Why would somebody pay $53 for this? And honestly, I still feel like that. I don't feel like you need to go out and spend $53 for a quad like this unless you don't have a lot of eyeshadow and you love this type of formulation where it has like a topper shade and then softer shades with it. If this is something you could see yourself using all the time, if you feel like it'd be a good value for you, then by all means go for it. But it's not something I'm gonna run out and say like everybody needs this palette, because I feel like even I don't necessarily need this palette. But I use this palette all the time. Like I always kind of fall back to using this when I want something simple and easy but still looks really pretty. I am really pleasantly surprised with that topper shade. I thought I would never use that, but I actually do use it quite a lot. And yeah, this is one of the few eyeshadow palettes in my collection that I didn't seek out and purchase myself, but I still ended up really loving it anyway. The next question is a palette that sparks joy, and I did go into great detail about how much I love the Limoncello palette. This also is one that sparks joy for me. But when I really think about something that sparks joy, I'm gonna have to go back to the Rose Quartz palette from Huda Beauty. Every time I open this, every time I look at the packaging, every time I create a look with it, I love it. And I don't think it's because this is just like the new shiny thing in my collection. I genuinely think that this is something that brings me joy when I open it because it's a palette that I genuinely love and not just because it's new. These gorgeous shimmery shades just catch my eye. I love the color story. Every time I look at it, I'm like, ooh, I could use this in my next look. Ooh, I can create this look with this. Like, I just get really inspired by it, and part of me wishes that every palette in my collection elicited the same response as this does. The next two questions are gonna have the same answer. The two questions are the newest palette in your collection and the first palette that you used in 2022. Again, going back to the Rose Quartz, I purchased this one, I think in December of last year, so it's my newest palette, and it is the first one that I started using in 2022 just because I really loved the palette and I wanted to use it, but also it was one of my focus palettes in January. I was focusing on this and the Queen of Hearts Colored Rain palette together. I was really surprised to see that out of the 11 questions and out of the 20 eyeshadow palettes that I own, 4 of the answers were the same palette. This is a new favorite. It is a palette that sparks joy. It's the newest palette in my collection and it's the first one that I used this year. I feel that I really didn't get a chance to talk about all the other amazing palettes that I have in my collection, but I do have a palette rotation project plan that I'll be doing throughout the year where I'll be focusing on 2 palettes at a time, and I think that series is where I'm gonna let all my eyeshadow palettes really shine. If you'd like more eyeshadow palette content from me, I have an eyeshadow bingo tag. I have several eyeshadow related videos, including tutorials and reviews. I also have a Pan Those Eyeshadows project that I did for approximately 2.5 years. So if you do want more varied eyeshadow content from me, it's definitely available on my channel. Thanks to Allie and Samantha for creating this tag. This was really fun to do. I hope it was enjoyable to watch. Like I said, I will have all of their information and more videos like this in the description box if you would like more. But in the meantime, that's everything I have. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye guys.